I almost didn't buy Trails in the Sky first chapter, because, I'm not really that into JRPGs, and actually, in fact, I'd say it's one of my least favourite genres of game. I've, of course, played JRPGs like Persona and all the obvious ones, but I've never been hardcore into the anime-style ones, or Ys, Octopath, anything like that that's a little bit more niche, until now. And Trails in the Sky first chapter has done something to me. It's got me started on a JRPG kick that I don't know if it's gonna last, but it's flipped my entire gaming world on its head, and Trails in the Sky first chapter has become one of, if not my favorite JRPG ever, and it's up there with the best games I've ever played. I've sunk 45 hours into this game. I've done every side quest. And in this video, we're going to talk about the game, we're going to go through the story, the world, the characters, and then we're going to go through the gameplay and how it plays moment to moment, and then we're going to kind of wrap up with why it is the best JRPG I think I've ever played. And I'll tell you why, and we're going to go through critiques as well, though. This is not just going to be a video of me telling you how amazing this game is, because it's pretty damn amazing, but there's problems, and it's not for everyone. So, if you want, join me, and we're going to talk about it now. So, Trails in the Sky first chapter, for anyone who doesn't know, is a remake of The Legend of Heroes 6 Trails in the Sky. It came out in 2004, and on the PC, and then was ported to the PSP, and then was ported to the PlayStation 3, and it's one of those games, right? But basically, it's the start of the Trails series, which is now like 5 gazillion games long. And it all shares the same world and the same countries and the same universe in a kind of ongoing story. So I think they've brought out this now so that people today can kind of jump in at the beginning and start playing through the series. There is Chapter 2, the second game, is coming this year. So I think that's what they're going to do, is remake the older ones, because the older ones are like Final Fantasy VII style, top-down, turn-based, not a lot of personality. And they've turned it into a third-person anime style, graphical style, but, third-person, open-worldy type exploration game that still does have turn-based combat, but we'll get into that later. At the moment, we're going to focus on story and world. So the game starts off, you are Estelle Bright and Joshua Bright, and you live with Cassius Bright, your dad. Now, Cassius Bright is a bracer. Bracers, in this kind of science fantasy, steampunky, clockwork-punky world, are a group of people who go around, and their job is to help or protect just citizens of the world. They have guilds all over the place, but you basically go out on jobs, and the world's filled with monsters, so if someone requests something of you, you have to help them. That's your job. So your dad Cassius quickly has to go away on a job, and Estelle and Joshua have just turned 16, and they're junior bracers. They've just joined the Bracer Guild, and they start taking on missions in their little hometown of Rouen. And this is in the wider kingdom of Liberl, and there's many cities in Liberl, and we'll go into that in a second. But basically, that's how the game starts. It's very, from the ground up. And in retrospect, at the end of the sort of 45 hours I've played, you can see why they've done that. Because this is a game and a series that it has lore, but it drops you in at the beginning, and you learn, like, by the second game, you're going to be more experienced, and like, the character progression is second to none. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. Joshua and Estelle, basically, you have to do missions in your hometown while your dad's away. Your dad kind of gets into a little bit of trouble. A little bit of trouble comes, the world's way. Weird things start going on. But basically, the Bracer Guild suggests, hey, you're junior bracers. To become senior bracers, you have to get a letter of recommendation from every Bracer Guild, one in each major city. So the first area acts as a hub to kind of get used to the game and how it plays. And you meet characters like Sherazade, who are actually very fleshed out, considering you only spend a time with them in the beginning. Then you move on to like 5 or 6 different cities and areas as the game progresses. So your sort of main smaller mission is Estelle and Joshua need to progress up to senior bracer rank by getting letters of recommendation, by helping out people at the bracer guilds. These are sort of side missions. You go into a guild, you can pick them up off the board. Anyone who's played, World of Warcraft or anything, knows how you do that. Just grab quests, you go do side quests of like, help this person defeat this monster. But the overarching story is that, your dad starts to go missing, it's a bit mysterious, and there's these political machinations going on between all the kingdoms. And this goes back before the game started because Estelle's mother died 10 years before in a war between Liberl and the Empire to the north. And as Joshua, Joshua and Estelle have the same last name, but Joshua is actually adopted, and we see in the beginning that Joshua comes home with Cassius, he's hurt, and that's all we kind of find out. And this kind of goes into the overall arcing story where you think, he's an adopted son, what happened? So anyway, you progress throughout the story, you progress onto each city, and you meet lots of different characters in each place, and it intertwines, and each place is unique. There's places, cities by the sea, there's cities in the mountains, you go into mines, there's all of this stuff. There's all of these empires at play, and there's characters, and I can't get too deep into it without spoiling it, but you will meet characters over and over again, and it stays very mysterious until the end, and we'll talk about the end in a second. But let's go on to gameplay. So it is turn-based, but in the same way that kind of like Final Fantasy 15 is turn-based, or Final Fantasy 7 Remake, where it's kind of, it pauses, lets you choose your attack, so then you go. But there's also an element of real-time combat, where before you get into the turn-based combat, you can attack kind of like Ni no Kuni style enemies, especially if they're lower level. That way you don't have to stop getting to a turn-based combat. You can just bash them, they explode, you get XP, and you keep on going. Again, this is a really crucial aspect of the game because you will spend a lot of time in combat and gameplay. Now, it's quite complicated to begin with because the gameplay, the combat has what are called orbaments, and they're basically this kind of like science fiction-y part of the fantasy world where you slot orbaments, which are kind of like a magic stone thing you find into your armor, into your weapons, into your, it's what dictates your kind of magic skills. I'll keep it quite like generic. That's not what they're called, but this is generally what they are. So like, say you slot in, you've got like whatever your little pocket watch thing, you slot these augments in, and you slot in like a bunch of blue ones. Well, blue is like healing, right? But you get buffs to HP and everything, but if you're slotting in blue, they'll give you like healing abilities. The more blue ones you slot into like the 6 slots that you get, you will have better healing abilities. You slot red in, they're fire. Green is like wind. Yellow is, I think, earth, and things like that. So basically each character, you can change their magic skills, for lack of a better term. You also can do, your basic attacks, and you get normal skill attacks as well with your basic weapons. So basically, if you have a sword, you can use sword attacks, and you can do area of effect with sword, but you can also use magic via the augments, and yeah, there's a lot of customizability. It's quite complicated. Once you get into it, you get the hang of it. It's not that complicated. So that is your basic how the combat will play out. Then of course you run into humans, monsters, robots, all kinds of crazy stuff in this game, and each will have weaknesses, and yeah, if you played a JRPG, you get the idea. Now, wider gameplay, as I said, you're going from bracer guild to bracer guild, helping people out and doing the main quest. The game is actually quite difficult combat-wise in certain places. It will give you, if you die in a sort of boss fight, it will give you the option to retry with easier enemies, which I had to do a couple times. I'm not even ashamed to say it, because if you look up some of these boss fights, it's crazy, and I leveled the absolute heck out of my characters. So don't be afraid to just, lower the difficulty for a boss fight, because some of it has some crazy... There's a difficulty spike near, like, the first boss fight that is actually harder than the last boss fight. So the pacing isn't all that great sometimes when it comes to boss fights, but in general, you know, you go around the world completing side missions, which gives you XP, you level up, you gain more stats every time you level up, so you become more powerful. And then you complete the main missions and find out what the heck happened to your dad, what's going on with these kingdoms in this world. And obviously it's drip-fed, and it's you find out the answers to the mysteries. And by the end of the game, there's a huge plot twist, which just makes me want to play the next game. Now let's talk about why this is the best JRPG I've ever played. After, you know, a roughly 45 hours, I'll have to check the playtime, I've completed every side mission. Now, what's weird is that one of the major critiques I've seen of this game is that it's too slow. I am someone who has very little patience with JRPGs that are too slow. But it did, yes, I can see that. That is an actual categorical fact, is this is a slow game. However, it did not bother me. And this is the major gripe I have with other games. And I think I've been pondering why that is. And I think it's because the game has such a gripping world, story, and characters. The combat is good, the gameplay is good, but it's kind of your generic fare if you've played any other games like Dragon Quest or whatever. The story and the world are the best I've ever seen in any kind of RPG, JRPG game. This is up there, like, on par with something like The Witcher 3. And that's because every guild you go to, every town you move on to, every area you go to, you meet characters that are fully fleshed out. They have voice acting, and the voice acting is amazing, by the way. This is some of the best JRPG voice acting. It's just, they have such good backstories. You know, there's a guy who... some of these characters will join your party and then leave your party and join your party based on, like, what's happening in the overall narrative. And so you'll get, like, this troubadour from the Empire, you know, the people who invaded you years ago, but he's, like, fun and weird and quirky. And then, as I mentioned, Sherazade earlier is your mentor from the Bracer Guild, and she will drink you under the table. And there's so many interesting people that you meet, and they're either funny, cute, you know, just, you meet reporters who you'll keep bumping into, and this new reporter who takes photos, but, like, you know, it's just, I've never seen such a cast of characters so well fleshed out where you're actually happy to see them. And then on top of that, the narrative for the game is super interesting and keeps you gripping, like, the whole time. It's like, you know, we're talking political backstabbing, coups, trying to overthrow governments. There's just crazy stuff going on. And then there's plot twists along the way. And as I said, yeah, the game is slow, but in the best way possible. Like, this is a game that, to give you context, the only other game I've ever done every side quest for is Cyberpunk, right? I am not I will do side quests if they're interesting in games where, like The Witcher, where they're fleshed out. I've never wanted to do every single one and then complete the game and it take me almost 50 hours of my life. And yet, something about Trails in the Sky Chapter 1 has drawn me in so much that is what has happened here. And I say that because if anyone else is thinking, oh, I don't know, or they've seen the critique that it's slow, it's just like, if someone who hates really slow, I'm not saying, you know, narrative game, I'm talking slow, you know, if as someone who really does not like and likes this game, then there's gonna be a lot for you to love here. Now, I'm not saying every person's gonna like this, but the way that it starts you off slow so you don't feel overwhelmed. It starts you off, there's not a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world. You're just a local bracer, as I said, helping people out, fighting monsters, and it slowly builds, and that slowness allows you to get familiar with the world. I found myself climbing towers and taking screenshots and stuff because the world is, like, really beautiful, and I was interested in it. It's the perfect size of everything. Your kingdom is like, by the end of the game, you will have seen the whole of the kingdom of Liberl. And that's good. It's big enough, but small enough to feel like, oh yeah, I know that place, and you go down this alley and you do that. You know, it's not overwhelmingly huge like something like The Witcher, say. And this has been a revelation for me, playing Trails in the Sky, first chapter, chapter 1, whatever it's called. It really has. I cannot wait for the next game. I'm now on a Trails kick, and it's honestly the best JRPG I've ever played. Now, if you are someone who doesn't like the slow factor, really like it, and you are a veteran of JRPGs, then maybe this might burn you out a bit, bore you a bit. I'm trying to be fair in my critique here, but honestly, like, wasn't really even my radar, and I'm not sure how big the Trails series even is in the grand scheme of things, because I'd kind of heard about them until this game released, and then I watched the trailer and I was like, oh, but if you're someone who's just never tried them, then this is, put this at the top of your list to play next, because Trails in the Skyfest chapter is just great. It's a great time, and I'll tell you what, if I've sunk 45 hours into it, it's that says something, because I don't do that with every game. I kind of get bored halfway through, I rush the ending. This is a great game to have, as a secondary game to pick up, play when you've got some time and kind of progress, and that slowness will lend itself to how much you enjoy the game. Yes, if you try to rush through it, you're going to be like, what? Because there's long pondering Kojima-like cutscenes and things like that, but I can't stress how much that you need that slow start to the game to build the narrative, to really understand these characters. And that's how the game goes. You get to learn each character at each little bit as you go, and then by the end, you get the band back together, crazy things happen, and each and every person, and you've helped them, and you've done side quests, and you really like every person, and it just brings everything together. So if you're a fan of story, gameplay is good here, but I would say gameplay is more secondary to story. You're going to find yourself doing fast forward mode, which is something I didn't talk about, but basically in the combat you can press R1 and L1 and it speeds up the combat really fast to get, it's kind of like an auto, battler, but not really. It just means that the animations play very quickly. So like, when you do get bored of fighting the same enemy, you just hit that, and then you just like quickly select your attacks and do this and that, and there is a auto battle mode too. So, but anyway, it just, that comes secondary, because it's more about the world, the characters, the settings, and I can only imagine, where the Trail series is now on its however manyth game, where this is going to go as a world, and where these characters are going to go, and how this is all going to play out. So that's my review of Trails in the Skyfest chapter. I recommend checking it out unless you're just burnt out on JRPGs, but frankly, it's the best JRPG I've ever played.